Welcome. In honor of the recent passing of the birthday and associated holiday celebrating the life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I've decided to make a video that contains the well-documented information in regards to his assassination, answering many of your likely questions in the process. So without further ado, here we go. Now, thanks to social media posts like those currently being displayed on the screen right now, you may already be aware of this 1999 civil suit, which took place over the course of 30 days with over 70 witnesses and led to the unanimous verdict that took under an hour to deliberate. The jury concluded that his assassination was the result of a conspiracy that involved the collaboration of local, state, and federal government with organized crime to carry it out. Before I continue, let's hear what Dr. King's family had to say on the matter.
Dexter King, the youngest son of the family, told the New York Times that he hoped history books would be rewritten to reflect this version of the assassination. But nearly 2 decades later, this case is largely forgotten, and it is still commonly accepted in schools and on the news that James Earl Ray killed Martin Luther King Jr. and acted alone.
We believe that the FBI had something to do with that conspiracy. It seems to me that the surveillance that my husband underwent as he traveled around the world by the FBI and the things that have already been revealed that are on record point toward the FBI having certainly known what was happening.
It's no secret that the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover had much contempt for Dr. King, which could be categorized as a mostly one-sided quarrel, with Dr. King barely even participating and only mildly critiquing the FBI over the years. Meanwhile, the FBI simultaneously made public and covert attacks on Dr. King.
FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover made headlines by calling Dr. Martin Luther King, quote, the most notorious liar in the country. Hoover made the comment in front of a group of female journalists ahead of King's trip to Oslo, where he received the 1964 Nobel Peace Prize, becoming its youngest recipient. While J. Edgar Hoover was trying to publicly discredit King, the agency was also taking covert action. The FBI sent King an anonymous letter.
Well, the thrust of it, and you'd had little inklings of this over the years from versions that had come out, but they'd been partly blacked out, and so it wasn't clear what the whole letter was really about. The gist of it is that it's an extremely threatening letter aimed at Dr. King that mostly goes into a lot of pretty graphic, accusatory language about his extramarital sexual activities and threatens him with exposure. And then the letter sort of ends saying, King, you've got to take action, you know what you have to do. And Martin Luther King interpreted that as an attempt to get him to kill himself, to remove himself from public life.
The FBI's one-sided quarrel with Dr. King only intensified after April 4th, 1967, when he publicly spoke out against the war in Vietnam at Riverside Church in New York, after which he was referred to as the most dangerous Negro leader in America. You may also recognize this date as it is on the exact same day, a year later, that his assassination would take place. Now, before I continue, if you're feeling at all a bit skeptical while watching this, please don't take my word for it. For those of you watching this on my YouTube channel, there will be plenty of links and sources provided below. For everyone else watching, here's 3 books to seek out for further details, starting with An Act of State, published April 17th, 2008, followed by Orders to Kill, published October 20th, 2015, and lastly, The Plot to Kill King, published June 20th, 2016. You may have noticed all the books were written by Dr. William Francis Pepper, the guy who won the case on behalf of the King family. You may be wondering, so how does an innocent man get sentenced to 99 years in jail without a trial for a crime he didn't commit? Even after the homicide file of 1968 concluded Ray couldn't have possibly been the gunman, as he wasn't even in the general vicinity of the shooting, and they know where he was. James was at a gas station trying to get a spare for a flat tire. Well, most high-profile political assassinations must include a fall guy or a patsy as a basic necessity. But the legal answer is that he pled guilty because of Alford.
That's ALFORD. It's a moderately old U.S. Supreme Court case, and it says even if you are not actually guilty and you are pristinely innocent, you may plead guilty to the charge if you think that doing so is in your best interest under all of the circumstances as you know them to be, and you're doing so freely, voluntarily, understandingly, knowingly, advisedly, and intelligently.
Many believe James Earl Ray to be an innocent man. Here's what Dexter King had to say on the matter.
I believe you, and my family believes you, and we are going to do everything in our power to try and make sure that justice will prevail.
So who cracks the hole open in this case? A man whose lover at the time, Betty Spates, witnessed him entering the kitchen back door of Jim's Grill with a steel smoking rifle just after the shots rang out, then proceeded to take the gun apart right in front of her. His name is Lloyd Jowers. Although Jowers wasn't the actual gunman, more on that later, he ran the aforementioned Jim's Grill directly across the street from the Lorraine Motel, and he admits that
Memphis businessman Frank Liberto paid him $100,000 to contract a killer.
What did Frank Liberto ask you to do?
He asked me to handle some money transaction, hire someone to assassinate Dr. Martin Luther King.
Which begs the question, who did he hire? He hired
Frank Strouser. He was a Memphis police officer, the best shot in the Memphis PD, and he was the one who actually fired the fatal shot.
However,
Strouser was not alone in this operation. The scene in Memphis that day had been carefully prepared, and the area of the Lorraine Motel was teeming with deep state operatives. As Dr. Pepper's decades-long investigation has exhaustively documented, there was a police surveillance detail keeping watch on the scene from the fire station across the street, a military intelligence unit on top of the fire station photographing the event, and even taking pictures of the real shooter lowering his rifle immediately after the shot, and a Special Forces backup sniper unit called Alpha 184, which was connected to the 902nd Military Intelligence Group.
there's enough overwhelming evidence that points to these claims, such as the U.S. 111th Military Intelligence Group being at Dr. King's location during the assassination for undisclosed reasons. The 20th Special Forces Group having an 8-man sniper team deployed at the assassination location that day. The regular and constant police protection for Dr. King being removed an hour prior to the assassination. Military intelligence having set up photographers on the roof of the fire station with a clear view of Dr. King's balcony. And lastly, the illegal sanitization of the crime scene by cutting tree branches, along with abandoning investigative procedure protocol by not interviewing key witnesses who lived near the area of the shooting.
You don't find that suspicious? You don't find that suspicious?
Because I do. Also, it's alleged that James Earl Ray randomly, without motive, from a flophouse, shot Dr. King while standing on a stool in a tub through a window at a hard angle even for experienced snipers with a Remington Model 760 Game Master. The same James Earl Ray who was nothing but a petty criminal, and an incompetent one at that, who at one point shot himself in the foot during an attempted robbery, and during another attempted crime, fell out of the back of the escape vehicle. Yet, modern scientific methodology and forensics testing concludes that the murder weapon was not a 760 Game Master, thus debunking the direct involvement of James, and proved that the fatal shot actually came from a
XM-21. It's a 7.62 by 51 millimeter NATO caliber weapon with a special stainless steel barrel, a 3-to-9 telescopic sight modified by a company known as Leatherwood. It was a Redfield sight, and they used special subsonic ammunition with a suppressor on the end to reduce the velocity of the bullet to below supersonic to confuse the sound signature.
Not only does the XM-21 match the forensic evidence, but also the description given by Mr. Lenny Curtis, a custodian who worked at the Memphis Police Department firing range, of a rifle he witnessed Frank Strouser practicing with all day before leaving the station with it. It's also worth noting that prior to doing so, he had made a remark while in the lounge area that King would get his brains blown out, all in the same day that it occurred. Here's some of Mr. Curtis's account.
When Curtis refers to the gun that Frank Strouser was shooting at the range as that gun, he was talking about a particular rifle, the Special Baby, with a polished wood stock, that had been shown to him just a few days before by a close friend of Strouser's, a fireman named Roy Young. And when Curtis was asked to describe what he saw or heard on the day King was killed, it went right back to Frank Strausser and that gun.
He was shooting a gun all day. But when he came up, it was during the time that we was getting ready to leave, and we was in the same location we were during lunch hour.
I mean, about what time of the day was this roughly, would you say?
That was about 3 o'clock.
Okay.
So we was cleaning up. And here he come up out of the thing with the rifle.
That same rifle when they said the
Same
special
look
gun?
like the same rifle to me.
What'd he do?
He went to Mr. Young's car. He had a Volkswagen, Mr. Strauss did, but he left in Mr. Young's car that day. Ruffled his hair up, and then he turned into what I say a fireman, because he had a white t-shirt on, blue pants, and put a pair of dark sunglasses on. But he let the top back.
All right, and then you saw him leave?
Yes, sir. He got in the car and pulled off.
Okay.
When he left, I waited until he got out of the drive, and I went across the street to the Board of Education. I had only 2 phone calls fair. I called the Union Hall, talked to the lady that was reception there. The young lady I spoke to, I told her, I said, this is something very important. And she said, what is it, sir? I said, it's a matter of life and death. And she said, whose life and what, you know? I said, I think these people are planning to kill Dr. King. And I said, I want to talk to Reverend Smith. She said, well, he probably with Dr. King. I said, there's no way, ma'am, you can get in touch with him. She says, not at this time, sir. So I called Dr. Vasco Smith. I let his phone ring for I don't know how long. No one never answered. I don't guess nobody was there. So I had no more money. I went back to the police department across the street, and I sat over there for a while, then I left and went on home. And when I got home, my wife and I was in the kitchen, and it came over the radio.
If you'd like to hear more of Mr. Curtis's accounts of what he witnessed and the tense encounters that followed the assassination between he and Frank Strausser, please refer to the MLK Tapes podcast, episode 11, titled A Dead Shot. The episode also includes a reenactment from the transcript of a telling interview that Dr. William conducted with Frank Strausser, the actual gunman. Strausser's fatal shot at the time of 6:01 p.m. came from the bushes directly across the street from the Lorraine Motel, which were later cut, as opposed to coming from the flop house or from the dormitory of Fire Station Number 2 as previously believed. We know this because
I started pointing to the rooming house. That's the only place that it looked like it could have come from.
Not that you heard the shot from there.
No, I didn't know where the shot came from. Now, it could have also come from the bushes.
But strangely, the next morning, the bushes were all cut down.
Somebody gave an order in the middle of the night to go out and cut down that underbrush, so that when the sun came up on the 5th of April, the bushes were no longer there.
To Young, it smacks of cover-up. But the Memphis police say they cut the brush away to help, not hurt the investigation. Still, the motel area was not properly sealed off to protect evidence, and at least some key witnesses were never interviewed.
Then I see this figure directly at eye length coming out of a crouched position in this bushes. When you look directly across from my doorway, you were looking at thicket.
Dr. King's driver, Solomon Jones, later told Caldwell and another reporter he too saw someone in the bushes.
He said he saw this figure from the bushes, but he actually saw even the puff of smoke from the shot being fired from there. I quoted him in my story that was in the New York Times the next day.
The 2 reporters interviewed others who also said they saw something.
How many people saw somebody in the bushes?
At least a half a dozen.
And some of them say they saw a rifle?
Yes.
And do you believe that's where the shot came from?
Absolutely.
Bishop J. Delano Ellis was another witness present. Though he didn't notice the shooter, here's what he did see and experience at the hands of the Memphis Police Department on that day.
Ellis vividly recalls how Memphis police were there within minutes, some of them physically beating Ellis and others. Ellis does not understand why, before police order him out of the area.
Along with cutting away the brush and not properly sealing off the crime scene, it appears that their erratic behavior is yet another indication that the Memphis Police Department had something to hide. For this next part, if you're familiar with the movie Judas and the Black Messiah, or know who William O'Neal is, you may not be surprised by what I'm about to say next. For those not familiar, brace yourselves. William O'Neal infiltrated the Black Panther Party's Chicago chapter, provided the floor plans used by the FBI to kill Chairman Fred Hampton, and drugged him on the night of his assassination. In Dr. King's case, however, there were 2 paid informants within his entourage who were pivotal in assisting in his demise. These 2 operatives were specifically instructed not to wear ties on the day of the assassination, as it would indicate to back up military sharpshooters who the friendlies were. Samuel Billy Cowles, under the guise of a dinner invitation, ensured that Dr. King would be at the target spot during the correct time, going as far as to knock on his door at 5:50 p.m. to let him know that they were running a little late. But in his own words,
about 5:45, we walked on the balcony, and he was talking to people in the courtyard. He stood here and I stood there. Only as I moved away so we could have a clear shot, the shot rang out. Thank you. I turned around and then I stood back on the balcony.
It's been a while since I've taken Psychology 101, but that's a textbook example of what's known as a Freudian slip, defined as a slip of the tongue that is motivated by and recalls some unconscious aspect of the mind. The other who assisted in the plot to assassinate Dr. King is Jesse Louis Burns, more commonly known as Jesse Jackson. He's responsible for moving Dr. King's room from the ground floor level of the Lorraine Motel to room number 306 on the balcony level, where he was more easily exposed and accessible. He's also responsible for relieving the Invaders, a local militia group and security detail that was there to protect Dr. King, of their duties on that day. It's been said that Dr. King was mistrustful of Jesse, and rightfully so. Though there's not much I can say on the subject that old Demigard and Kenneth Trimmerman haven't already said. But for now, evidence of this can be seen in Dr. King's behavior at the end of his final speech, Mountaintop. There, you can clearly see Dr. King passing up an interaction with Jesse Jackson in favor of one with Ralph Abernathy. Also, many sources have concluded that Dr. King was upset with Jesse Jackson at the time of his assassination. For more information on the relationship of Dr. King and Jesse, please refer to a book known as Shakedown, Exposing the Real Jesse Jackson by Kenneth R. Trimmerman, published December 1st, 2003. The last piece of evidence that proves that Dr. King was right to be mistrustful of Jesse can only be told by Hosea Williams.
Then I heard Jesse Jackson say, he told me, Jesse, take our people on to the mountaintop. And that didn't bother me, even though I know Jesse got nowhere near him. And then Jesse said, I held his head in my hand while he died. And that didn't get to me. And then Jesse said, look at my shirt. And I looked around, sure enough, and Jesse Jackson's shirt was drenched in blood. And I realized the only way Jesse could have gotten that blood was stoop down on that floor at the Lorraine Motel and rake that blood off that floor and put that blood on him. And I went crazy. I really tried to kill Jesse. They grabbed us and all that, but that hurt me so bad. The other thing was, when Abernathy came back, says, no need of prayer, no need of cry, no need of nothing. He is going, it's over with. He's going to glory. And we called a meeting, a staff meeting, and Jesse claimed to have been ill. And Abernathy told him, Jesse, go ahead to the room and relax. Jesse had to have run like hell that room into that airport because he got out of Memphis to Chicago. All us feeling, everybody was still in the motel. Cut the televisions on the next morning, that was Jesse Jackson in Chicago with that same bloody shirt on, telling that same lie. I've never respected Jesse since that moment.
So why would Billy Cowles and Jesse Jackson betray Dr. King? Power? Jealousy? Envy? Cowardice? Well, it's worth noting that both made a career for themselves by alleging to be the last to interact with Dr. King. But aside from those things, money was a big incentive. Currently being displayed on the screen is an excerpt from the transcript of the deposition of Ron Tyler Atkins. Ron is the younger son of Russell Atkins Sr., who was a Klansman, a Mason, and a Dixie Mafia gangster who played a pivotal role in this conspiracy. His son details the involvement of Cowles and Jackson as paid informants. It's also worth noting that it came out that Ernest C. Withers, a photographer and journalist present during the assassination, who can also be seen in several pictures taken, came out as an informant. Although there's no evidence I could find that points to him being directly involved in the conspiracy. Now for the most grueling part of the conspiracy yet. It's been well documented that Dr. King was still alive when he left for the emergency room that day, and likely would have survived the experience. Why didn't he? According to surgical aide Lula Mae Shelby, she witnessed Dr. Breen Bland, the chief of neurosurgery at St. Joseph's Hospital, enter the room with two others who were wearing suits. He called Dr. King a slur and told everyone to get out of the room and to stop working on him. She looked over her shoulder as she heard all three gathering spit in their mouths to spit on Dr. King. She then watched in horror as Bland removed the pillow from underneath Dr. King's head and proceeded to smother him with it. The actual cause of death was asphyxiation. His assassination could best be summed up as FBI-funded, Dixie Mafia organized, police-perpetrated, military-backed, informant-aided, and finished off by someone who was supposed to be a medical professional. Now that we've reached the conclusion of the findings on the assassination of Dr. King that came out during the 1999 civil trial on the matter, we're left with only two questions. What do we do? And where do we go from here? My suggestion is that we pick up where Dr. King left off, in building an intersectional movement of proletarians to champion the causes of economic reform and redistribution of wealth.
And the economic problem is probably the most serious problem confronting the Negro community. And I might say the most serious problem confronting poor people generally. And I don't want to be narrow about this, talking only about the black poor in our country, because I must be concerned about Puerto Ricans who are poor, Mexican Americans, American Indians, and Appalachian whites. And we are confronting a major depression in the poor community. And I think the time has come to bring to bear the power of the direct action, the nonviolent direct action movement on the basic economic conditions that we face all over the country.
All labor has dignity. Yes. But you're doing another thing. You are reminding not only Memphis, but you are reminding the nation that it is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages.
We must also realize that the problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
America's opportunity to help bridge the gulf between the haves and the have-nots. And the question is whether America will do it. There's nothing new about poverty. What is new is that we now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty. The real question is whether we have the will.
And on that note, I feel it appropriate to bring this video to a close with the statement given by his beloved wife, Coretta Scott King, during an Atlanta press conference on Thursday, December 9th, 1999, in reaction to the Memphis jury's verdict. Here it is, as read by Miss Maya Amber.
There is abundant evidence of a major high-level conspiracy in the assassination of my husband, Martin Luther King Jr. And the civil court's unanimous verdict has validated our belief. I wholeheartedly applaud the verdict of the jury, and I feel that justice has been well served in their deliberations. This verdict is not only a great victory for my family, but also a great victory for America. It is a great victory for truth itself. It is important to know that this was a swift verdict delivered after about an hour of jury deliberation. The jury was clearly convinced by the extensive evidence that was presented during the trial that in addition to Mr. Jowers, the conspiracy of the mafia, local, state, and federal government agencies were deeply involved in the assassination of my husband. The jury also affirmed overwhelming evidence that identified someone else, not James Earl Ray, as the shooter, and that Mr. Ray was set up to take the blame. I want to make it clear that my family has no interest in retribution. Instead, our sole concern has been that the full truth of the assassination has been revealed and adjudicated in a court of law. My husband once said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Today, almost 32 years after my husband and the father of my 4 children was assassinated, I feel that the jury's verdict clearly affirms this principle. With this faith, we can begin the 21st century and the new millennium with a new spirit of hope and healing.